Emmanuel. Oh, sorry, yes, it's being recorded. I'm really proud to introduce Emmanuel Johnson, a PhD candidate from USC in computer science, and he will be discussing how to develop intelligent tutoring techniques with AI. His research generally focuses on personalized feedback from autonomous negotiations, something like sort of human-computer interactions. Emmanuel received a master's in robotics from University of Birmingham in England and a BS in computer engineering at North Carolina A&T. He's received numerous awards, including NSF Graduate Research Fellowship, Spirit Award from New Brunswick Education Foundation. He's a Fulbright Fellow, and he received an Outstanding Engineering Student Award, Man of the Year Award from Carter Wood Johnson National Recognition Symposium. Anyway, and of course, a member of AAA IACM, all the typical, all the usual suspects. And so with that, I would like you to take it away.
Right. Thank you very much, Keith, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep, we can.
All right. Hello, everyone. First and foremost, thank you, Steve, for inviting me to give this talk. And I hope everyone is doing well, given all the craziness that's happening today. Today, I'll be presenting a talk titled Improving Negotiation Training Through Automated Personalized Feedback. And so my talk is going to flow as follows. I'll begin by essentially discussing why we chose negotiation, giving you some background on negotiation. Then I'll dive into my work on generating automated feedback, looking at how you display automated feedback to users and the effects of that on learning overall, as well as some successes we've had. From there, I'll discuss some ongoing work we are conducting and conclude it and leave it open for questions. Feel free to ask questions during the presentation. However, at the end, I will provide about 15 minutes or so for whatever questions people may have. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So one of the things we know is that people negotiate every day. And generally, we can look at negotiation as either you're trying to make deals or resolve disputes. So oftentimes, let's say you're trying to buy a house, your car, negotiate your salary, that will fall under making deals. And then resolving a dispute may be, trying to come to a common agreement with a colleague. And as we've seen in the last year, really, getting people from opposite political ideologies to agree. And what we find is people are really bad at negotiating. And this poor negotiation ability can have both personal, political, and economic impact. For example, we know that 90% of court cases are settled through negotiation. So if you're not a good negotiator, then it's very likely that you will lose the majority of your court cases. Now, there is hope. A number of institutions offer these short courses. They can range from anywhere from a day to a week. However, the issue with these courses is that they tend to be very expensive, ranging from a few thousand to anywhere to the upwards of tens of thousands. So to give you an example, both Harvard and Wharton have a negotiation course. The 5-day course at Harvard costs roughly 5,000, and the one at Wharton is roughly 12,000. Now, what are you gaining in these classes? Oftentimes, the negotiation classes flows as follows. You begin with the instructor introducing a number of principles of good negotiations, may go over some examples, and then students gather in groups and are able to practice those skills amongst each other. At the end of the session, typically in a larger classroom, the professor may pick or an instructor may pick a few of the best students and a few of the worst students and compare those results to give you a sense of how well you did relative to other students in the class. Now, there's also been some work in the automated agent community to build virtual simulations that people can use to practice the negotiation skills. And so two of those include BILAT, which was developed at ICT, and Pocket Negotiator. So BILAT is a cross-cultural negotiation training system where you're able to engage in various negotiations with individuals from different cultures. And then Pocket Negotiator serves more as a tool to help you in your negotiation. And research has shown that just by practicing with these agents, people are able to get better. However, what we know from the education research is that feedback isn't enough. I'm sorry, practice isn't enough. And feedback actually plays a crucial role in the negotiation training space because with feedback, you get not only a sense of how well you did relative to other people, but you also get actionable recommendations on things you can do to improve. And so, with feedback in mind, my work really focuses on the last two steps of this three-step process in teaching negotiation. So, given that we have these automated agents that students can practice with, can we enhance that experience by adding feedback? And can we design a feedback tool that's agnostic of the system that you're using? And so to do that, I'm going to borrow ideas from the intelligent tutoring systems community. So the way intelligent tutoring systems um, typically work, and they've been used extensively to teach more technical skills such as math, physics, so on and so forth. But the way these system works is they begin by building a cognitive model of how students solve a problem, and then use that model to assess the results or the trace of what a student is doing. And based on the discrepancies between those models, the system is then able to generate personalized feedback. So let me give you a sense of how that works. So let's assume that we're trying to solve this problem and we're trying to solve for X, right? So if we distribute this three across the terms in this parenthesis, we come to 3x minus 15 equals 9. And if we solve for X, we get X equals 4. So let's say that the student tries to do this and we see that they reach this answer. Well, if they keep solving further, they'll get an incorrect answer of 7/3. Well, if we sort of track this, we see that one of the mistakes they're making is they're not properly distributing this three across the terms in the parentheses, and thus these systems are able to recognize that and perhaps can provide feedback on that specific error that a student's making. And so, what I want to do then is sort of adopt this idea from intelligent tutoring system of building a model of the proper way of solving problems, being able to track how closely students follow these models, and then providing feedback. So the first question is, well, where do you even get these models of good negotiation? Well, I'm going to detail that in two parts. In part one, and these parts are centered around key concepts taught in negotiation courses. So in part one, I'll focus on value claiming. So value claiming is this tactic often taught, and the idea here is that you want to claim as much value in a negotiation as possible. And in part two, I'll detail how we develop metrics to quantify value creation. And so, in the value creation case, you want to find win-win situation. And oftentimes, in a negotiation, you and your opponent may not want the same thing. And so, value creation teaches you how do you gather more information so that you could come to a more acceptable deal for both parties. And in doing so, in highlighting how we teach both of these concepts, I'm going to begin by showing how we're able to take principles currently taught in the classroom and quantify those in a way that allows our system to reason about it, and then use those systems to diagnose different, what I'm considering as bugs or errors that students make when they negotiate. And then with these bugs, or with these metrics, I show how I can use that to provide feedback. And there is evidence that this feedback is helping negotiators get better. Once I've shown you how we can generate feedback and the success of these metrics, I also will highlight some of our ongoing work in transitioning this into the classroom, and as well as the real world. So let's begin in part one, value claiming. So as I stated earlier, value claiming is this idea that you want to get as much out of the negotiation as possible. And so there's a number of tactics that people uh, use to claim more value. Um, and I've highlighted a few of these here. So one of the things that people do is they anchor. So anchoring means you begin with a high initial offer. And the reason why anchoring is important is because anchoring sets the tone for the rest of the negotiation. The other thing you want to do is you want to avoid single issue offers. So if you're negotiating over 5 or 6 items, you don't want to make offers where you're only negotiating over one issues. You want to make multi-issues offers. So let's think about a job negotiation. You may be negotiating your salary, perhaps stock options or vacations or whatever the perks are, right? So in this case, you will want to make offers that state what level of each of those issues you want to claim rather than negotiating a salary first and then moving on to stock options. The other tactic people often use is they make negative concession. So what this really means is that you're not conceding over time. You're staying strong to your position, and so in that way you're able to gain more in the course of the negotiation. And the last piece is that you use as much time as available to you. So you don't want to be in a rush to end the negotiation too early if it's not necessary. And one thing to note about these principles is that they've been shown to be predictive of a negotiation outcome in a human negotiation, but not in a human agent setting. And so the first thing we want to see is one, are these metrics that are predictive of negotiation outcome in a human setting also predictive of a negotiation outcome in a human agent scenario? And so to do this, we use the conflict resolution agent negotiation corpus. So in this corpus, we had a total of 156 human agent negotiations. And so in these scenarios, participants played the role of an antique deal um, who has essentially come across this abandoned locker with the agent. And so the goal here is that you have a set of preference over these items in the locker as well as the agent. Neither one of you know the other person's preference. And so the goal here is to um, try to get as much of those items as you want without um, screwing the other person over. And so the way we incentivize participants to do well is enter their we enter ticket in a lottery proportional to the amount of points they receive. So the more points you got, the higher your chance was to win in this lottery. And so this system is a Wizard of Oz system, meaning that you have a human actor controlling how the agent works. So to give you a sense of how this works,
Well, hold on. I might be able to concede. Well, let's concede one of them. But I'd have to do 2 chairs and a plate if I were to give
No,
up one of the chairs. I mean, what, you know, how do you feel about that?
no, that's not gonna work for me.
All right, so then what would work for you? What do you
It's pretty
suggest?
obvious that we both want the chairs.
Or,
How about if I take 2 chairs and the clock and you take 1 chair and both plates? I know you have buyers for these plates since they're in really good condition.
I mean,
How does that sound to you?
you said it yourself. These plates are in really good condition. So you could
But,
take, but here, no, here's the thing though. You could take both of the plates. I have too much dinnerware, as is. You could take both of the plates that are in really good condition, and since you have a buyer for the chairs, take one of the chairs. Because all I can really use is the chairs. I can't use the
same
plates.
here.
But you just said about the plates, though. You said that they were in really good condition, which they are. So you could use them. I mean, unless you know you have a
Well, you see, I
warehouse.
have a buyer right now that's interested.
so as you can see, people really get into these sessions and they feel to you really get a rich interaction. And so from these sessions, we're able to generate a log of the negotiation.
Sorry, can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
Was that a Wizard of Oz setting?
Yes.
Okay, I was gonna say that's pretty good agent otherwise.
Yeah. This is Wizard of Oz.
And as long as you're interrupted, I'll say when I heard him say, hold on, hold on, hold on, I thought he was interrupting you, Emmanuel, and telling you, taking issue with something you said.
Yeah, I gotta say, like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is NLP is amazing. So, what is Wizard of Oz? How do these agents actually interact with these people so naturally?
Right. So Wizard of Oz in this case isn't really using any NLP. 'Cause we have a human, we have essentially an interface that allows us to control what the agent says as well as the body language.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
So from these
So
interactions,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, Emmanuel, I have a follow-up question then related to that. Not really my area, but if you're controlling it, how are you controlling it in real time when you're interacting with the human there?
Right. So for these agents, we have a interface that allows us to control it. So it's a list of buttons that control these utterance. So all right. So for this agent, we have a finite set of utterances that the agent can make, and so they can either make offers, response to a question that the human says, and so we generated these utterances over the course of a few years. And so using those buttons, we have a wizard that has we have a camera as well as a microphone to understand what they say. So there's in some cases there may be a slight delay as the wizard is trying to figure out which button to use, but in the most cases, we've gotten really good at really being able to respond to the user in a very quick manner.
Okay, thanks.
And the wizard is a person, right?
Yes.
I think important to note this.
Yes. So the wizard is somebody at another computer terminal sending commands to this virtual agent. All right, cool. So from these interactions, we're able to give a log of the offers that were made, questions, as well as statements. And so from there, we can extract some of these metrics I discussed earlier. So for example, anchor. If we want to figure out what the anchor is, we just look at the student's first offer. Looking at the concessions that are being made, we can see whether the agent goes up, down, so on and so forth, as well as the offers that were rejected. So using this, let's assume that records were worth $30, lamps 20, and then paintings 10. So then the total value would be 140. So if the student claims 2 records and 2 lamps initially, then we say they're claiming about 71% of the value. We can count the number of times that they rejected an offer, as well as the number of negative concessions. So as I stated earlier, negative concession is essentially you're not conceding as you progress through the negotiation. So we're able to detect that behavior. And so as I stated earlier, these principles were shown to be effective and correlated with negotiation success or outcome in a human negotiation. So really what we're doing here is to first validate that these metrics do work in a human agent scenario. And so what the results show is that, yes, our metrics are also correlated with negotiation outcome in a human agent setting. So as I stated earlier, the higher your initial offer is, the more likely you are to do better in the negotiation. And we see this by the fact that anchoring is statistically significantly correlated with negotiation outcome. And we see that for agreement time, rejected offer, and negative concession. Now, what I showed earlier was that you don't want to make single issue offers. You want to make multi-issue offers throughout the negotiation. And so what we see is that even in this scenario, people who do make single issue offers are not doing as well. And this is negatively correlated with the negotiation outcome. And so what these results help validate is that, yes, these metrics being used in human negotiation are indeed correlated with success in a human agent negotiation. So with these metrics in mind, the next step is we want to see if we provided students with feedback based on these metrics, are they going to get better over time? And so to do that, we ran a study in which we had participants engage in the antique dealers scenario from the corpus I described earlier. And we had a total of 60 three participants, and they were roughly divided equally across condition. So participants in the feedback condition, as well as, I guess, participants in all condition completed two negotiations. Those in the feedback condition received feedback after the first negotiation before they began the second, and those in the no feedback condition did not. And so participants were negotiating with a Wizard of Oz system, but the feedback itself was semi-automated. So the feedback was automatically calculated based off the results that we inputted into the system, but we had a human deliver the feedback to participants. And so to give you a sense of how the feedback may look, so let's look at this as an example for anchoring. So for the anchoring feedback, we usually show you a graph of how well you did relative to the agent. And then we start by one, describing what that graph is, telling you how much value you receive, and then giving you some actionable things you could do to either better your initial offer in the next negotiation, or let you know that you're doing well and keep doing the same thing you've been doing. So given that we are giving feedback on anchoring, the first thing we want to see is, does feedback help participants make higher initial offer? And so the short answer is yes. So what we see is that participants in the feedback condition are making statistically more higher initial offer in the second negotiation than in the first, and this is not the case for the control condition. And we see that their participant in the control condition are making roughly the same amount of, or making equivalent offers in the second negotiation as they are in the first. And so what this shows is that, yes, feedback is helping. The next thing we want to, yes.
Sorry, is the control condition, you haven't given them feedback, but you told them at the start. So, I mean, is the control condition, they don't know anything about anchoring, or is the control condition, they know about anchoring, but haven't been shown what anchoring looks like in their negotiation?
Control condition, they haven't been shown what anchoring is.
Okay.
But what both conditions do receive is some information on the points they receive in the negotiation.
Okay, but so, I mean, you could, so this shows that knowing about anchoring helps in training, but it doesn't tell you whether or not the interactive aspect of this is that the, you don't have whether or not the interactive aspect of the tutoring system helps. Is that, am I understanding it correctly?
Right, exactly.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Right, and so the next thing we want to see is, does feedback affect the negotiation outcome? And so what we see is that those who did receive feedback claim more value in the second negotiation than they did in the first. And this is evidenced by the significant difference in the points they received in the second and the first negotiation. And what we see is that in the control condition, in the second negotiation, people are claiming slightly more, but they're not, but that is not significant. So to summarize, what I've shown is there's these principles often taught that follow value claiming, and we can take these principles and quantify them for automated systems to reason about how well a student is following them. And I also show how we can diagnose errors that students make using these principles, and there is evidence that this is helping students get better. So the next thing I want to move to is value creation. And in value creation, as I stated earlier, the idea is you want to essentially do what is called growing the pie. And to do that, you need to know a bit more about your opponent. And some of the tactics used to create value is you ask questions about your opponent's preferences. You try not to assume the fixed pie bias. So the fixed spot bias in negotiation is assuming that you and your opponent had the same preferences and there's no common ground, and thus you assume that there's no way you can evenly split the pie where both of you get what you want. But what we find is oftentimes that's not the case in negotiation. And the last thing you do to help create value is really not only just asking about your opponent's preferences, but being able to communicate your own. Now, when you really look at the problem of value creation, is really opponent modeling, trying to understand what your opponent wants. And so there's essentially two channels of information that you can exchange with another negotiator. You can make explicit comments, such as saying, I like one item more than the other. And you can you can communicate information implicitly through your pattern of offers. And so the challenge here is being able to pay attention to what your opponent is saying, share a little bit about yourself to garner some reciprocity, and then use those sources of information to make creative offers. And so to do that, we're going to borrow an idea from the automated agent negotiation agent community, and use these opponent model to help us gain some insight in how well students are following these value creation tactics. And opponent models have been studied extensively in the automated agent communities where researchers have developed automated systems that can negotiate with each other. Oftentimes, these agents really communicate through their pattern of offers, and they may, in the course of a 10-minute negotiation, they may trade upwards of 1,000, sometimes even 10,000 offers. And so in 2015, Nazari and colleagues showed that you can adapt some ideas from some of these models using the agent-agent community to understand agents as well as a human's preference in a human-agent negotiation. And so to give you a sense of how Nazari models work, let's look at this negotiation trace. And so the first model that we're able to generate is based off of the statements that an agent made. So using the statement model, we see that the agent says, I like chairs and plates. So we can say that we don't know which the agent prefers more, but we know that they like these two equally. We can also generate a model based solely on the offer. So using an offer model, we see that the agent made an offer where they claimed 2 plates and gave their opponent a chair. And so in this case, we can say, well, it's most likely that the agent likes the plates more than the chair because they're claiming more for themselves. And then the last model is a combined model, which combines the information for both sources of information, channels, which combines the information from both channels to create a more accurate representation. So in this case, we most likely assume that the agent wanted plates more than they wanted chair. So using this model, if we generate a correlation between the model generated from our system to the agent's true preference, we get a measure of how accurate our model was at understanding what the agent wants. And what Nazari's work shows is that one, the combined model outperforms both the individual models. And then also we know that students are not as accurate as these models at understanding what an opponent wants. But not only can we generate these models for the agent, but we can also do it for the student. And so throughout the at the end of the negotiation, we're able to learn separate models of how well, of what both the agent and the student wants. And using this information, we can create diagnostics to help us understand what errors the student may be making. So let's look at how that will work. So if our opponent model fails to learn an accurate agent model based on the data the agent provided, then what that most likely means is that there's not enough information being provided by the agent for us to understand what it wants. And so what that could potentially map to is that the student isn't asking enough questions for the agent to provide more information. And so one of the feedback or lesson points we can highlight is, hey, you may want to elicit more information from the agent. Another thing that we can diagnose is, let's say the opponent model fails to learn an accurate student model. And this could be one of two things. If the student is purposely trying to, hide that information, then that's a good thing. But if the student, isn't getting a good outcome, then we can say, perhaps the issue here is that you're not revealing enough information to your opponent for them to really understand what you want and help come to that win-win deal. And so one piece of feedback we can give is teaching students how to reveal more information about themselves. Okay, so to test this idea, we use a corpus of human agent negotiation, but this time negotiators or students interacted with the Iago agent. So Iago is a system that was developed by Jonathan Mell, a recent graduate of our lab, and Iago is a fully automated system that allows humans to engage in a multi-issue bargaining negotiation with automated systems. So I'll give you a sense of how Iago works in a bit. And so this corpus contains a total of 477 participants, and we incentivize participants to do better by entering tickets in a lottery proportional to their performance. So this study was ran using Amazon Mechanical Turk. And once again, unlike the previous Wizard of Oz system, this is fully automated. So to give you a sense of how Iago works, let me show you this quick video. So in Iago, we're able to make offers, and this is fully web-based. We can ask questions about our opponent's preferences. And we're also able to make a number of general statements. And so using this data from Iago, what we expect is that, or what we hypothesize is that opponent models should be able to diagnose value creation bugs. And so let's see how well we did. So kind of the first sanity check we wanted to do, as I stated earlier, Nazari's model showed that the offer statement model outperformed the other two. And so the first thing we want to do is to see if indeed that is the case. And the reason why this is important is because we're switching from a Wizard of Oz system that's a bit more engaging, and it allows users to engage in a very natural interaction to a more menu-driven system. So we wanted to make sure that these results do translate to other systems. And so what this shows is that indeed the offer and statement model does outperform both the offer model and the statement model independently. And we see also at the end of each negotiation, we asked participants what they thought their opponent wanted. And this is and so their results is highlighted by this user category. And so what we see is that our models are outperforming the user. So the next thing we wanted to see is how well is our model able to understand the channel in which the agent's communicating information. And so as I stated earlier, one of the concepts that is often taught is this notion of anchoring. So often when you anchor, you begin with a high initial offer that claims more value for yourself. And so what we expect is that agents that do anchor should be communicating more information through their pattern of offers, and those that don't anchor should be communicating more information through other channels. And this is what we see here. When we look at the agent in the anchoring condition, we see that most of his information, it comes from this pattern of offers. And when we look at the case of the non-anchoring agent, we see that the information is communicated through its statement channel. All right. Now that we have a sense of how to gather which channel an agent or student is communicating through, The next thing we wanted to see is how well are students utilizing the information provided? Can we detect how well students are utilizing the information provided by the agent? And so in this case, we divided students into two groups. There were the experts and the novice. So experts were the top 30% who got the agent preferences correct, or closest to being correct, and the novice were the bottom 30 percentile in performance. So what we see here is that the experts are doing just as well as the model in understanding what the agent wants, but we see here that the novices aren't. So in this case, what's happening is there's information being presented to novices that they aren't picking up on, but the experts are really able to hone in on what the agent wants. So not only does this show that we're able to understand whether or not a student is utilizing information provided, but it also supports our assumption that novices are not really good at following these value creation principles. And so with these metrics in mind, we want to then see if feedback presented on these metrics do help students get better or not. And so to do that, we ran another feedback study, in this case with Iago, fully automated systems. And we divided participants into three categories. So you either receive personalized feedback, generic feedback, or no feedback at all. And so those in a personalized feedback condition receive feedback on their specific interaction. In the generic feedback, it was somewhat similar to what's done in a classroom, where we give you a potential, an example of a negotiation and tell you how well that person did and give you some feedback on things that they did wrong. And then the no feedback condition did not receive any feedback at all. And so participants, there's a total of 90 participants, divided almost equally. And after the first negotiation, those in a feedback condition did receive feedback. So just to give you a sense of how this feedback looks, this is an example of feedback on your final offer. So what we do is we show you a graph of how well you did relative to how good you could have done, discuss how much points you're leaving on the table, and give you actionable feedback on what you could do to get better. And then in terms of information exchange, we ask you a question at the end of the negotiation to understand how well you understood your opponent's preferences, and then use that information to give you feedback on what you may be doing wrong in your information exchange. And so using these feedback, what we expect is that, one, those participants in the feedback condition should do better than those in the non-feedback, but also that personalized feedback should be the most effective at helping negotiators improve their value claiming behavior. And so what did we find? So the first thing we wanted to check is their ability to elicit information. And what we see is that although personalized feedback seems to be asking more questions, those results are not significant. So across all three conditions, we don't see that participants are doing better at asking questions. Another measure of value creation that we want to look at was joint points. And so the idea of joint points is, if I know what you want and you know what I want, then we can come to a win-win scenario that maximizes both of our outcomes. And so what in this case, what we want to see is, does personalized generic feedback help you increase your joint points? And so what we see is, we see a significant and main effect of feedback. So participants in the feedback condition are getting significantly more points than those than those who do not receive feedback. And then also we see that the participants in the feedback condition are definitely getting more points, more joint points than those in a generic feedback condition. So what this shows is that people are able to utilize this feedback we're providing them to maximize joint value. And last but
People,
not, yes.
sorry, are people without feedback actually getting worse a little bit, it looks like?
Yes, so they're doing slightly worse, but it's not significant.
So, okay, yeah.
And since John interrupted, I'll interrupt you. The comparison that you're measuring the significance for is, did a version change? So you don't have a measure on this slide that compares significance for personalized versus generic feedback. Is that correct?
Not on this graph, but
Okay.
we did compare that. Yes.
Okay. And was that looks like it should be significant, but graphs can be misleading. Was it
Yes.
significant?
Exactly. So the difference between personalized and generic was significant, with those in the personalized getting much more than generic.
Thanks.
Cool. No problem. All right. And the last metric we want to look at is the negotiation outcome. So are you doing better in the negotiation? And so in this case, what we see is that um, all participants are getting better, or getting more points in the second negotiation. But what we find is that those in the feedback condition outperform the no feedback, with participants in a personalized condition doing the best. And so what this really shows is that one, feedback does help, but the type of feedback matters, because those who receive personalized feedback tend to do much better than those who receive generic feedback. So to conclude part two, what I've been able to show is that one, there are these principles commonly taught in the human negotiation course that can be quantified and used to diagnose bugs in a human agent negotiation. And we can use those principles to provide feedback, and this feedback does help participants learn. And so now let me highlight some ongoing work, because you may be wondering, well, yes, if you provide feedback and participants engage in negotiation back to back, it does help. But how does this transition to the real world? Does practicing with this system actually help you get better if you're going to go negotiate your job, so on and so forth? And these are all great questions, and this is what we're looking to do now. And so one of the issues we want to use the system to address is the pay gap in medical schools, and help medical students improve their negotiation ability. So the American Medical Association is interested in this gender pay gap. And so what has been shown is that most medical students are nervous about their first salary negotiation, and that first salary get really affects your compensation down the line. And so the medical school at UCLA conducted a survey that showed most of their female medical students are really nervous about negotiating their salary, or really dread the process. And so what we've done is we've partnered with UCLA Harbor Medical Center, as well as a professor in the business school, Dr. Corinne Bendersky, to create a salary negotiation training for medical students. And so the way the system works is that we have a variety of different modules on various negotiation subjects. So students typically, similar to how they would in a in-person classroom, they watch a video where we have a professor describe various principles, and then they're able to practice with Iago, and then we give them feedback on how well they did. And so we began this pilot study towards the middle part of last year, but given all that has happened with COVID, most medical students are not concerned with this right now. And so we are just now sort of getting this study back up and running. Unfortunately, I don't have any results to report on this, but we are in the process of validating that this system does indeed translate into real world success. And so to conclude my talk, what I've been able to show is one, there are these principles often taught in-person negotiation class that we are able to quantify in an automated system, and we can use those quantifiable metrics to provide feedback. This feedback does help in a learning environment, and we're in the process of transitioning to a real world setting. And that's it for my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was really great. Now that the talk's ended, do people have other questions?
You want us to raise our hands, Keith, and you'll call on us, or do you want us to just randomly speak, or what?
Well, it looks like, yeah, there's a lot of people who have questions. So I think, yeah, how about raising your hand? But since you appear to have raised your hand first, John, why don't you speak first?
Okay. A somewhat provocative question, I guess I wanted to ask was, so it was a great talk. I really learned a lot, and I'm interested, looking forward to our discussion later. I just wondered, at the end, you mentioned that the UCLA Harbor is funding this initiative to help new doctors increase their negotiating skills. I'm kind of surprised. I would think that it would not be in a hospital's best interest to encourage its doctors to ask for more money. How did that negotiation go with you and them?
Right. So I think in many cases, I think that the problem here is that um, they want their students to be more competitive on the job market, and oftentimes medical students don't realize there are a number of different things you can include in your compensation package, right? So some of the things is how many nights you're going to be on call, how much of your compensation is incentive versus uh, your salary, so on and so forth. And so I think from the medical school perspective, they want to make sure at least that their residents are thinking about these things as they go into the job on the job market, so that you can essentially have a better quality of life as a new medical professional.
I see. So they want their residents to do well. Thank you.
Exactly.
Great. Wolf?
Hi, great talk. Thank you very much. In practice, a lot of dialogues are really start out by establishing trust, building rapport, whether that's legitimate negotiations or in nefarious activities like spear phishing. Do you have a sense of how important building trust and establishing a rapport is compared to the core negotiating techniques that you have described?
Right. Great question. And I think in many cases that's those initial processes are very important. And I think those are topics that I would like to explore in the future. I think what we've focused on a lot here is what we consider as more so strategies and these concepts that are much more straightforward and quantifying. And so, but yes, I think the rapport building, this is a concept that comes up in the negotiation literature quite a lot. And I think it's something that is important and does need to be incorporated into systems like these.
Great. Thank you. Stephen?
Thank you for the good talk, Emmanuel. The question I have is an open question for you. You talked about the next work you're doing that's in progress, but if you take a step back and look a little further ahead, blue sky, not just what's funded and in progress, where do you see the most exciting directions to go?
I definitely see, I think sort of what was mentioned in that last question, I think bringing that more social element into here, because I think what we've primarily looked at is more so tactics and the more rudimentary things that are taught in the introduction to negotiation courses. But if you think sort of towards the more advanced negotiator, a lot of that is going to be based on very subtle language cues and being able to detect those. For example, even being able to detect nervousness, when somebody's not as confident, being able to build rapport with them. I think all of those are sort of the next step to advance this system. Because when you think about a negotiation, generally, I think we can look at sales, we can look at a variety of fields that are in many ways a negotiation. And so extending the humanness of the system to a number of different domains is, I think, some next steps.
And does that lead to more collaboration with natural language processing and machine learning and those sorts of things, or?
Absolutely. And there's another PhD student in our lab who's looking at bringing more advanced NLP techniques into the negotiation space. And he and I have been discussing ways in which we could do that, because in some sense, when you introduce this menu-driven interface, now you're adding yet another cognitive load. But I think, these are some initial steps to validate that this is actually helpful.
There's a question in the chat room, but since Yolanda had her hand up first, I would like to have Yolanda ask a question.
Hi, thank you. That was a great talk, Emmanuel, and it's really nice recent work that you've been doing. I see a lot of potential for some of the work that we're doing on environmental modeling, where there's a lot of stakeholders that are farmers or local populations that really have no negotiation skills compared to the utilities or the big industry. So this is fantastic work. My question is more on the tutoring side. So some tutoring systems assume that you're teaching the student a new skill, and I think a lot of what you discussed is in this line. But sometimes tutoring systems have to assume that the student has the wrong skills, so they have erroneous beliefs about negotiation, and so you have to kind of detect that and try to fix it. So I wonder if you've thought about that, or if you have noticed in any of your evaluations or experiments whether that happens a lot, or generally people are just ignorant about negotiation skills.
Okay, I think, let me make sure I'm answering this question right. So from my understanding, what you're asking is essentially, are we making certain assumptions about the students' knowledge coming in, and do those students sort of follow that assumption? Is that sort of the question, Yolanda?
Yes, because imagine that I may be very bad at negotiating, but it is because I use the wrong tactics.
Right.
Right.
Right. So I think what we've seen in our work is that generally, I think sort of what this is. Let me see if I can find this slide. I think sort of what this is getting at is that people often don't understand what their opponent want, and in many of these negotiations, you see participants start, and the first thing they do is start making offers without really, taking a step back and trying to get a sense of what the opponent wants. But also, what we find, which is evidenced by this as well, is that you do have some people who come in knowing a bit more about negotiation and are able to, do well without much assistance from us. But yeah, you get a nice range. I would say though that some of the things that people don't do really well is share information as well as ask questions. And so that's one skill that we haven't been as successful in teaching. And I suspect is because we don't have as good of a natural language system to then be able to have them negotiate in a natural way.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Yolanda. The question from Marjorie, I'm sorry, was, are you looking at nonverbal signals? And I think this relates to the previous question about detecting nervousness, etc.
Yes. So right now we're not, because we don't have, in the Iago system is a web-based system that does not have a camera. And so all we're really able to capture is what they've said or done through the menu-driven interface.
All right, great, thank you. Are there any other questions?
I just wanted to maybe quickly ask, so how do you see this working, or do you foresee a way to scale to giving feedback for new problems, or is that just the determining what the feedback to give is kind of the choke point right now?
I'm sorry, can you ask that again?
So like I was recently playing cribbage, and I realized like I'm really making a bunch of mistakes when I'm playing cribbage, and I would love to have somebody give me feedback on, oh, you should have done this, and then you should have done that, and you would have gotten more points that way. It'd be lovely to be able to transition that and like not have it take somebody like thinking very carefully and writing up a bunch of rules. And I wondered if there's any kind of what you thought the prognosis of being able to to transition to other feedback in other diverse domains, or maybe not as diverse domains. So maybe like there's something that's like negotiation, so we can take baby steps there.
Yeah, I think that the general process of, looking at sort of these principles that good individuals in different domains use, and then going through the same step of trying to quantify those, and then the type of feedback that we give can be transferred to different domains. So that the main idea here is, here's these things that good negotiators do in the real world. We can quantify those using these methods, and following theory of feedback, and making sure that our feedback is not only informative but also actionable. I think those general concepts can be leveraged in other domains to create more effective feedback systems.
Awesome,
Thank
thank you. One aside, it looks like Sandra Johnson, is that your mother?
No.
Oh, I thought last name. Okay, never mind. So in any case, with that, I think we can finish. So thank you. Thank you again, Emmanuel.
Problem. Thank you all for attending.
And thanks again for coming and for the good talk.
All right.
I'll talk to you later this afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.